So welcome everyone who's joining us today. This session is called Beyond Burnout, Hormones, Nutrition and Your Busy Brain. So my name is Emmy, I work for Get Doper, and we run these sessions about once a month. Basically, it's topics that our community will benefit from. We listen to you, we know what the things are that are on your mind, and so that's why we bring in our team of brilliant experts to offer help and support for anything that you might need. So how the session will run today is that we've got a series of questions that we've either taken from our community or that we know things that people are struggling with. So we're going to go through those questions, and our experts, who I'll introduce in a second, will answer them. I'd like to really, really strongly encourage people to put questions in the chat, and we will get to those. How it will work, if you put a comment in the chat and it's related to the matter we're discussing at that time, I'll do my best to come to you right away and address that. If it's something that we've not yet covered, it might wait till the final 15 minutes of the session, and then we can address those all at once. But please do not be shy. There are no silly questions. We are here to support and guide with anything that we can. So if there's anything that you would like to know, any problems, then please just pop that in the chat and we will be happy to answer. We've got some slides to accompany the session just to guide us through, but I just would like to introduce our wonderful experts today. We've got Karine Stephan, who is a registered nutritional therapy and lifestyle practitioner specializing in women's health, ADHD and neurodiversity. And we've also got Liz Chauhan-Grof, who is a career mentor and executive coach supporting sustainable careers and inclusive workspaces. So we're really happy to have you both here today. Thank you so much. So I'll get on with our first question, if that's okay with you two. Okay, so the first thing we want to cover today is, what does burnout actually look like for someone with a busy or neurodivergent brain, and why can it feel different from what we usually hear about? And Liz, I'm going to go to you first for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think how it looks different from what might be described as classic burnout is, instead of the obvious exhaustion, although that can present itself, it can really show up as increased irritability. You can suddenly have real difficulty with tasks that used to feel like almost automatic. There's also sometimes a sense of detachment, almost like you're going through the motions without actually being present. And I think what's in particular here is, not only do you get that, but the masking that neurodivergent individuals experience, it also amplifies the drain as well. So if you think about neurodivergent women, they're often expending a massive amount of energy simply to pass, or to try to pass, if they are indeed doing that, as neurotypical. So in terms of burnout, that can hit harder and faster, and to people externally, it might also be quite invisible. So often those coping mechanisms that are used and then they're used up, and then until it's really about sort of almost complete collapse. So, and given that our lives are under such microscopes in all areas, and my specialism is the workplace, and that in particular, but if you compound that with all different areas of our life. So I think that's probably how it shows up differently, and that's the experience of, but also the recovery piece as well. Rest alone isn't the only option. It won't necessarily resolve it, and it's to maybe ask those questions about some of the underlying causes as well. So hopefully that answers that question. And Karine might have some things to add from her perspective as well.
Yeah, I think you've touched on it already, but for neurodivergent, and I would also put in this category the highly sensitive people, highly sensitive women. It can actually be the cumulative effect of sensory overload, like sound, temperature, the everyday stress, and not having enough time or space to recover. So it's not always about doing too much. It's this cumulative effect of sensory overload, if that makes sense. I think.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We've got founder Matt in the background here running the slides for the session. So if I can just ask Matt to move the slides on one, that would be amazing. I didn't actually cover everything that we were going to talk to you about in the session, so you can see it there on the screen now, so you have an idea. I apologize, I didn't run through that before. So it's what burnout looks like in a busy brain, which we've just covered, hormones, energy and focus, whether it's burnout hormones or both, burnout in the workplace, sustainable ways of working, nutrition and lifestyle support, what does good enough look like, and where do we start? So thank you for that very thorough answer to our first question. That was really helpful. And I believe if Matt can just move the slide on to, and then the next one. Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Brilliant. Lovely. I love when it works. So the next question is, how do hormonal changes, especially in our 30s, 40s and beyond, influence mood and focus in neurodivergent women? And I think, Karine, you're going to lead on this one.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, many women, they spend years finding ways to manage work, family life, and what they may later actually realize are actually neurodivergent traits, but they often become incredibly good at coping. So that might be through staying organized, aiming for perfection, people pleasing, masking, or simply pushing themselves to keep going. And for a while, in your 20s, 30s, early 30s, those strategies can work really well. But then somewhere, like somewhere in their late 30s or early 40s, many women start noticing that those strategies that they used to cope with, they don't seem to work quite as well as they used to. And they may feel more, suddenly feel more, or gradually feel more forgetful, more overwhelmed, more emotionally sensitive, or they find it harder to focus or stay organized. And some even start wondering whether they are losing their abilities or somehow failing. So what I often explain is that hormonal changes, they don't usually create entirely new challenges. They tend to amplify challenges that may already have been there. And we know that hormones such as estrogen interact with our brain chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. So these play important roles in our attention, motivation, mood, and emotional regulation. So when hormones fluctuate, so particularly during this period of this stage of life, during what we sometimes call perimenopause, so these systems can become less predictable, and some women really notice the difference. So for neurodivergent or highly sensitive women, this can show up in very practical ways. So for instance, sensory sensitivities can increase. The noise feels louder, the clutter becomes more distracting. Heat, especially lately, for instance, heat is harder to tolerate. Busy environments can become more overwhelming. So for instance, if we take the example of a crowded train during rush hour that used to be a bit annoying, it can suddenly feel completely exhausting. And also some women, at least that's what some of my clients have expressed, they notice an increase in their rejection sensitivity. So for instance, feedback from a colleague, a disagreement with a partner, or even just a delayed text message, all this can suddenly carry much more emotional weight than it used to. And it's also worth mentioning, again, masking here. So many women have spent years working hard to hide their struggles or to fit in with expectations. And these hormonal changes, they can make that harder to sustain. And some women find they simply don't have the energy to keep masking in the same way as they used to. And it's important to remember that this doesn't mean we are becoming weaker or less resilient. Actually, in many cases, it simply means that our nervous system is having to work harder during a period of significant change. Also, by this stage of life, many women are already juggling careers, carrying responsibilities. They may have some health issues, relationship pressures, or all these multiple invisible tasks. Some are raising children, not all, but some are caring for aging parents or supporting other family members, or managing, like I said, their own health challenges. And more recently, we've started to think about neurodivergence as more of a whole body experience rather than just simply a neurological or brain difference. So we know that it can influence sleep, stress resilience, sensory processing, emotional regulation, physical health, and energy levels. So hormonal changes are often happening against that backdrop. And in my experience, we often feel these women, highly sensitive women or neurodivergent women, they often feel these hormonal changes more strongly. For instance, we know there's a strong association between ADHD and PMDD. So PMDD stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So PMDD is a severe form of premenstrual symptoms that can significantly affect mood, energy, or day-to-day functioning. And what's interesting is that it's not necessarily about having abnormal hormone levels. So we may test, what we call a neurotypical woman and a neurodivergent woman. We may not see any difference, but it's more about being more sensitive to normal hormonal fluctuations. And this may explain why some women experience more pronounced changes during the menstrual cycles, perimenopause and menopause. I don't know if you want to add something, Liz?
Yeah, I would say the only thing from a workplace perspective is that I think generationally there's quite a unique experience, and I think it's because of this layered life experience of the caregiving that often women have the role of. And very uniquely, this is coming from caring for generations coming before them and also after of them, and usually the convergence of where a lot of people are within their careers. Often in our 30s through to our 50s, we are, if we are in traditional work environments with a traditional career trajectory in organizations that have that sort of employer-employee relationship, that it requires a very unique skill set and one that is incredibly demanding. So this will be absolutely amplified for what it does in terms of us hormonally, and then from how our individual minds and brains work.
Thank you both. I think it's interesting, from meeting our customers for Dover, I think we often find this is the time of life when they come to us because it is that change and they start to notice they need a bit more extra support. I mean, I certainly relate. I'm 43 and I feel like this is the stage when whatever's going on in your body and mind, you don't know whether it's real life or whether it's perimony, and it's very confusing. Everything just starts to change, and I'm sure there'll be people in the chat who absolutely relate to that. So thank you for answering that so thoroughly. So our next question is how can we tell whether what we're experiencing is burnout, hormonal shifts, or a combination of both?
So yeah, this one is for me again. So yeah, this is probably one of the most common question I get asked, and quite often actually the answer is that it's a bit of both. So hormonal changes can make us feel can make us less able to handle stress, and at the same time, ongoing stress can make hormonal symptoms worse. So these two issues they often affect each other, if that makes sense. So I suggest that women try to be curious about their symptoms. So instead of being too hard on themselves, so rather than asking what's wrong with me, we can ask what's happening here. So trying to notice any patterns. For instance, do your symptoms get worse at certain times of your cycle, like maybe a week before you expect your period? Or are they connected to poor sleep? Have you noticed them more during your early 40s? Or late 30s? Are there any specific stressors at work or at home that could be making things harder? Once again, it's also important to talk about rejection sensitivity. So many women find their emotions feel stronger during times of hormonal changes. And the feedback that used to feel manageable, the colleagues' feedback, whatever, friends' feedback, it can suddenly feel very personal. I really like the phrase, I can't remember who said that, but I don't know if you've heard, name it to tame it in relation to rejection sensitivity. I think it's an American psychiatrist who mentioned that, and I thought that's really good. And actually, I reflect on it myself when my rejection sensitivity gets triggered. So sometimes just noticing that a reaction might be caused by stress, hormones, or too much stimulation, it can help. If we reflect on this, it can help us be less hard on ourselves. If that makes sense. And also from a nutritional therapy perspective, so before assuming everything is due to burnout, ADHD, or hormones, I always think it's worth ruling out any common contributors to fatigue or cognitive or brain difficulties. So low iron, low vitamin B12, low folate, a vitamin D deficiency, even thyroid problems, they can all contribute to symptoms that can look very similar. So my usual advice is to test and not guess. And also for some women, HRT, which stands for hormone replacement therapy, it can help. I have to say it's not right for everyone for various reasons, but if hormonal changes can is really affecting your quality of life, it's always worth talking to the GP or the healthcare practitioner. Liz, would you like to add something?
Sorry.
Yeah, I would say that.
Right. Sorry. No, there was just a little bit of disturbance there. Sorry, Liz.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, and from a work perspective, the saying of test, don't guess, and starting to notice patterns, so you can understand a little bit about actually where, if I believe or I think I'm experiencing symptoms of burnout, is to look at what parts of your life that is experienced in, and start to really notice and note down. And whilst we don't want to give people loads and loads of admin, but however you feel comfortable, whether that is some voice to notes on your phone, or scribbling down in a diary, or you might also have a digital diary, however it works for you, because I sometimes think in that moment it's not until you reflect back later that you can really start to spot things and see where things are anomalies or standalone, or indeed that there might be patterns, whether that's in your working life but in also other areas of your life, to understand more. And as you say, I think we get really curious at this time of life, and change, whilst it's really, really tricky and can be really, really difficult, it is also a fantastic opportunity to continue to learn more about ourselves, be it at work, be it at home, be it in our own health and well-being, be it, you know, mental, physical or emotional or otherwise.
Thanks, Liz. And yeah, that's a very positive message. I'd just like to remind people, if anyone wants to pop anything in the chat, if anything's striking a chord or you want to ask anything, please feel free to do so. So our next question, and Liz, I think we're coming to you first for this one. So it's, how does burnout show up in the workplace for neurodivergent women, and what are some of the early signs that people might miss?
Yeah, I think some of the early signs that you can look out for is, and it comes back to one of the things we were saying earlier about the methods, the processes, the things that we were used to using and making really good use of, that you would sometimes rely on them even more, or they aren't working, and sometimes it's the breakdown of those systems and processes and coping mechanisms that then can reveal other things that are going on. You know, I think actually I'd love to hear it in the comments, but you know, do we agree that actually neurodivergent women may appear fine until this sort of very carefully constructed scaffolding that we make use of in ordinary times suddenly comes undone? You know, it can be things like in the workplace, it can be, you know, I usually meet all my deadlines, but somehow I've missed them. It can be, I'm never late for meetings, or I certainly don't let anything from a time perspective slip. Or, you know, really uncharacteristic disorganization, because often if somebody is neurodivergent, they will have put into place lots of interventions to cope within a neurotypical workplace. So those can be examples. From a more internal perspective that can obviously be read externally by others, but you know, examples of social withdrawal, or you know, is the communication slightly faltering? Is it shorter? Are you less engaged within meetings? Do you notice that you're not wanting to input as much? You know, in all forms of communication, it could be in, you know, emails. Do you even have the energy to show up, you know, in a detailed email that you would have usually sent previously? Potentially avoiding those informal chats in those points when you're, you know, actually present in an office, or however you choose to socially work, because actually what we're doing is conserving our energy, and actually we're really struggling to keep up with the demands of work. And actually the world of work is getting, I don't know, it's a shame I've got like a little hands up, you know, who believes that the world of work is even more complex. It's a fascinating one, but it's more and more complex. So you put that as the backdrop against somebody that is experiencing this, and it can also mean that sometimes physical symptoms can get, you know, dismissed, whether it's by yourself or by others. Things like headaches, that fatigue, sleep disruption. You know, Karine mentioned it earlier on, this increased sensitivity. If you think of most workplaces, if that's indeed where you do your work, they aren't always set up for a neurodivergent individual and all the various needs. So you can often, you know, write these off potentially as stress, but these could be something else that's bubbling beneath the surface. So hopefully that's given people something to think about there.
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat, but Karine, have you got anything to add before I go to the question?
Well, I think Liz has been very thorough with her reply, but yeah, like she said, you know, I think one of the first signs is simply feeling exhausted by things that used to feel easy or routine, and suddenly it doesn't anymore. But yeah, you've already expressed it really well.
Well, thank you. So Anna in the chat has just asked, I'd like to ask about burnout for younger neurodivergent women, and what hormonal support or nutrition you'd suggest for them?
Sorry, do you mind to? So it's more related to nutrition, am I right?
Yeah, for younger. Obviously, we've talked a lot about women who are of a peri or menopausal age, but Anna's asking about hormone and nutrition support for younger women.
So we are going to touch on nutrition and lifestyle. I think it's question 6 or 7, I think. So basically the advice that I will share there is it doesn't matter whether you're a teenage girl, a woman in her 20s or 30s, you know, the advice is going to be very similar. Is maybe if you feel like you still have questions afterwards, we can go back to nutrition. Would that make sense? Or do you want me to be a bit more specific already?
If you feel that the answer to the question will be covered later on, then that's fine.
I think so, but then if there are more questions related to nutrition, I'm very happy to answer these questions afterwards.
Okay, well, why don't we go through the questions, and then at the end we can come back to it. Anna can give us a nudge if she feels like she's not had the answer she wants, so we can cover that for her. That's absolutely fine.
And can I mention one thing for Anna that might hopefully also be, you know, I know she's asked about nutritionally, but also I think it's really powerful and quite valid to also acknowledge that actually, you know, burnout is not the preserve of one particular age group. In fact, you know, I have had clients that have been younger, and actually sometimes it can be really, really tricky for young women to feel that they can seek out the support and have a voice and know that it's okay to ask for help. So I think we'll come to some of those a little bit later, but it might be that there is, you know, if this is showing up in other areas of a young person's life, and you know, if Anna wants to ask anything else, then it might we can cover that off later as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. Anna, I hope that's okay for you. So our next question is about sustainable ways of working. So what does a more sustainable way of working look like for someone navigating burnout and hormonal changes? And again, Liz, I think you're going to lead on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. More than happy to. I think in terms of thinking about rather than the coping with, rather than thinking about how you work best in the workplace. And I think one thing that is almost a non-negotiable is the word flexibility. And flexibility will look different to different people. And more, although we are seeing a little bit of a backlash, but from an employment law point of view and your rights and support within the workplace, flexibility has never been supported more. So thinking about what do I need in place to be in the best place to get the work done and how I get it done. And maybe noticing those varying levels of and patterns of energy. How does that work out across the day, across the week, across the month, to try and see what your patterns are? So if you are then to look to go to your workplace for support, and that could be from lots of different avenues. It could be from your line manager, it could be from the HR team, if indeed there is one. It could be from a like-minded person that is a peer of yours. It could be from, often there are champions, there's definitely menopause champions in the workplace, or things that are called employee resource groups. So if you work in a larger organisation, those are usually peer and employee-led. Then those can be really safe spaces with which to maybe test out and discuss, because the likelihood is, and given that there's been recent studies and the levels of burnout within the workplace are absolutely huge, and people talking about their experience of it, that you are unlikely to be the only person, although it can feel a very singular experience. So in terms of some practical things there, you know, how do you build in regular recovery time? not just as a matter of almost crisis intervention. Real proactive rests. Can you, on those days when maybe you have more control over your working day, can you set what is high and low demand time? What about the sensory breaks that mean that you're using, say, different tech in different ways? And actually, there's really good science behind the number of meetings that we have in a day. So, asking the question of yourself: do you have to be present in every single meeting? And if you feel unsure, can you ask somebody at work that can help you with that as well? And actually, how can we advocate for ourselves with those really explicit accommodations? Once you understand those patterns and what works for you, how do you advocate for that and take that and start to normalize and bring this into conversations? And that can be tricky, but with lots of other challenging circumstances, the more we normalize this, the easier it is. And that avoids that really pushing through to the point of absolute crash. So hopefully that gives some hints and tips. There in summary, we've got, so understanding those energy patterns, those golden hours are those, almost looking at the peaks and troughs of when you operate really well. We can often feel like we have to do everything, especially if we are in a role where we are leading others or managing others. Actually, what are the real healthy boundaries around what that is? And at certain times of our careers, we feel like we're constantly having to prove ourselves. So delegation is often almost like a dirty word, but actually asking ourselves, when can we delegate? We don't have to do it all. And as I gave some really good examples there of actually building in some recovery time. And those don't need to be expansive and big and costly. Often businesses, if you're taking this to a company that you work for, often these changes are absolutely cost neutral, and they often benefit because actually you're happier and more productive at work.
Brilliant, thank you,
So
Liz.
hopefully that helps give people some things to think about and thinking about how they can apply it to themselves at work.
Wonderful, thank you. Karine, is there anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to mention the golden hours, but you've done it, Liz. So I think it's really important to understand our own energy patterns. I know it's not always, I think, it's easier, I guess, if you're self-employed, because you can manage your timetable around your energy patterns. It might be a bit more difficult if you work in an office, but I think it can make, and in my own personal experience, it's made a big difference. And we just have, just because we can do something, it doesn't mean that we should. I know it can be hard sometimes to accept that, but it can make a big difference when it comes to our own well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant, thank you. And just a reminder, if anyone does want to pop any more questions in the chat, they're very, very welcome to. So our next question, and this might answer some of what Anna was asking before. So when someone feels exhausted and overwhelmed, what are some key realistic nutrition or lifestyle changes that can genuinely support energy and reduce burnout? And I think, Karine, you're leading on this one, aren't you?
Yes, I am. So so the most important thing to remember is that the goal is not perfection. So when we are exhausted and overwhelmed, we often have this tendency to look for complicated solutions, but actually it's usually the basics that make the biggest difference. I think especially when you are experiencing exhaustion, the feeling of overwhelm, the last thing we need is a complicated meal plan, a long list of supplements, or a recipe with 20, sometimes 30 ingredients. What tends to help the most are simple strategies that are realistic and easy to stick with. And I mean, it's also important to recognize that some stressors can be avoided. So many people are like we said earlier on, they are caring for aging parents, raising young kids, managing their own health issues or difficult life circumstances. So once again, the goal is not perfection, but finding the most supportive and realistic options for our own individual situation. So one of the most common things that I see with my clients who feel exhausted and overwhelmed is irregular eating habits. We know that busy brains, they need a steady supply in nutrients to support focus, to support mood, energy. So skipping meals can actually make things worse in many cases. And at least that's my experience working with hundreds of people. And so for many people, simply aiming for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it can be a powerful first step. And once again, it's not about perfection, so better fed than unfed. For example, last week, just to give a concrete example, I spoke with a client who often skips lunch, and we decided that if she wanted to have overnight oats for lunch, it was absolutely fine. There are no strict rules about what food we have to eat at certain times. So sometimes the most important thing is making sure that we are eating regularly rather than aiming for the perfect meal. So if you fancy breakfast for lunch, or what we call breakfast for lunch, or if you fancy your leftover dinner for breakfast, there's no rule. Better fed than unfed. And protein and fiber are really important because they will help support, make our blood sugar levels more stable. And as a result, our energy is going to be more consistent throughout the day as well. And another thing that I know sounds very boring, but staying hydrated or finding ways of staying hydrated. And that's quite a big struggle for my clients. So we often use the method of habit stacking when it comes to hydration. So because it's important to understand that most of our brain is made of water, and even mild dehydration, it can really affect our focus, our mood, or cognitive performance. And also, I strongly believe that in choosing convenience when we need it and doing it without feeling guilty at all. So you can rely, frozen vegetables and fruits, canned beans, pre-cooked grains, healthy ready meals, shop-bought soups that you can top up with a source of protein, mixed nuts, simple snacks. Sometimes convenience is what we need to keep us eat well on a regular basis. One other thing I would like to mention is alcohol. So obviously, I'm not here to tell anyone not to drink, but it's worth remembering that alcohol and burnout, they aren't really good friends. So because alcohol can affect our sleep, our mood, our energy levels, and it can make us feel less resilient the next day. So this is more for the diet side of things and hydration. And then moving our body is another helpful tool. I prefer to use the word movement than exercise, especially when people are feeling extremely overwhelmed and exhausted. So it doesn't have to mean intense exercise. So even like a 5 or 10 minutes walk after a meal, for instance, counts. So it's going to support our mood, our digestion, our blood sugar, our energy levels. And finally, if you are dealing with significant fatigue, it's quite important to talk to a healthcare professional or to your GP to see if testing might be helpful. So I touched on some important nutrients earlier on. So we know that nutrients like iron, vitamin D, folate, vitamin B12, they are all extremely important for energy and brain function. And thyroid health as well is another area worth considering. So once again, my approach is always to test rather than guess. Liz, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think when I put my work hat on, I think these simple, I wouldn't necessarily, I know, Karine, you describe them as more sort of boring, but these incremental, smaller changes can be really powerful. And how many times have people skipped lunch at work because there's what seemingly is a deadline that can't be ignored. Are you able to step away from that computer screen, and can you mix up your meeting styles, and starting to think about the crossover between some of the things that Karine has suggested and actually how they show up in your working day, whatever that working day looks like. And I often find in my clients, those that are, if you like, achieving or reaching the intentions, goals, objectives that they set out, is usually through steady, consistent, incremental wins and effort, and how that translates into behavior. So I think these are all really connected.
Brilliant. I've got a question to come to in a second, but if I may take the opportunity to say this is one thing that we've really tried to address for our community on the social. So I don't know if people might have seen already, but we have a content series called 555. So it's 5 ingredients, 5 steps to make 5 meals for the week. So we're really trying to address that need for super simple food prep. We worked in conjunction with a nutritionist, so all the meals are nutritionally balanced. They all contain protein. They've all got, the design to give you steady energy. So if you haven't seen those already, it was our way of trying to make food and eating feel not overwhelming for people. So please do go and check those out if you haven't already. So, Karine, Anna has asked, do you have any tips for breakfast when there is a strong element of nausea, brain fog, and exhaustion in the morning? The only thing that can be tolerated is sugary cereal, but we know this isn't ideal.
Yeah, I mean, so it would be more like sweet type of breakfast then. So, I mean, you can just play around. So usually, especially when clients are very overwhelmed, I tend to play around what they do already. So we discuss how we can, instead of removing things, removing often for some people, because there are lots of food sensitivities and intolerances as well with my clients. So I have to be careful not to remove, what they would, especially in a period of overwhelm, remove, what we would call a safe food. So we can add to these things. So let's say you're, I don't know, can you name a cereal? I'm not too sure. Let's say Weetabix. I don't know if it's a good example, but Weetabix is actually not that bad at all. You can add to it. You could add nut butter, or if the texture is too much for you in the morning, you can add a bit of peanut powder. You can find that online, because you will be adding a source of protein, and it has a really nice aftertaste as well, especially if you like peanut butter. But it's lighter than the peanut butter version, if you see what I mean. And why not add a small portion of either fresh berries or frozen berries? You can defrost a small portion overnight, and in the morning it's ready. I mean, otherwise, other good option, especially if you've got a very sensitive digestion in the morning, like chia puddings works really well with my clients who don't really tolerate breakfast. Once again, you play around, think about things that you like, the type of milk, the type of fruit you can add to it. If you're really struggling to get your protein in, you can add a bit of protein powder or peanut powder, or a bit of nut butter, peanut butter, almond butter, or tahini. And then you can top up with berries, or you can slice half a banana, for instance. Overnight oats as well, if you tolerate oats, are quite good ones, and you can stay in the fridge up to 3 days. So you can these are things that you can batch cook, same as the chia pudding as well. So I find that these are usually well tolerated, especially if you prefer like a cereal-based type of breakfast. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. What I would also say is often it's about meal timing as well. So if we try to bring, we know that having an earlier dinner is better for our health for many reasons. So we are more likely to sleep better, because naturally we have a bit of a sluggish digestion in the evening, because if we think about our ancestors, they used to eat their dinner when it was daylight. So naturally we are not really programmed to eat late when it's dark. So the earlier we can have our dinner, the better. I know it's not always possible with our modern lifestyle and our working days, working hours. So we are more likely to have a bit more appetite in the morning as well. And another way to stimulate a bit the appetite in the morning could be like by having a ginger tea. If you like ginger, it can really help. It's very soothing for the digestive system. So you can have a ginger tea, warm ginger tea. It's quite soothing. And then, it kind of prepares your digestive system to breakfast.
Well, that might be something that's helpful for Anna, because she said she does have some nausea in the morning. So a ginger tea hopefully might help with that, Anna. And she has added that, yes, there's a lot of food sensitivities there. So yes.
Ginger is great. Ginger is, I have ginger every day because I have this tendency to nausea as well. It's actually quite common with neurodivergence, ADHD, when earlier on I referred to the whole body experience. So yeah, ginger is your friend, especially if you've got nausea.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got 13 minutes left of the session roughly, so if people do want to pop their questions in, please do, but otherwise we've got a few more things that we can keep going through, but please don't be shy. If anyone wants to ask anything, please do. So our next question is about what good enough looks like. So what does good enough support look like on a difficult day, both at home and at work?
Would you like me to go first? I'm happy to.
Whoever's happy to go first.
You can go first. I forgot it was a shared question.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's putting good enough in place of the perfect when it comes to work, especially if we are trying to manage our energy levels as well as actually how our unique minds work. So certainly at work, maybe communicate your limits early on. It can be as simple as saying to the immediate team around you to say, actually, you know what, if they are aware of what you're going through, is to say, actually, you know what, in terms of my sort of battery, this is what I've got today. And is it okay if I maybe focus on this and I reorganize this and this, or I'll prioritize X and Y, but actually, can Z wait till tomorrow? And setting realistic expectations, so it actually reduces that cognitive load on yourself, and also the pretending that everything is fine that goes along with that. And because you've communicated that, then others around you, and more often than not, I think about actually that's us internally, but actually externally, how can we not only communicate, which I've given the example of, but actually look to others for support when our internal resources are more depleted than they would usually be. And that's to actually say to people, actually, how can you help me? I think if somebody else was to ask us for help at work, what do we usually do? Yeah, of course. What do you need? How can I help you? How can I make today easier? So I think the balance of what goes on internally and externally. But also there's other practical things, think about the timers that you use throughout your day, just to keep an eye on your energy sources, working through some, visual checklists. Also actually looking at how you work alongside somebody else, and also the delegation of other tasks that actually, are there people alongside you that you can help with that, but usually you'd maybe take on yourself, especially on those really hard days as well. It doesn't have to mean that you're constantly doing more. It can mean that actually you're thinking very much about the balance of where your energy is placed. So hopefully that helps as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Karine, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so for me, good enough support means focusing on what feels realistic. So sometimes, like I said earlier on, a ready meal and a bath of salad is better than skipping dinner, for instance, or a 5 minutes walk is better than no movement at all, or even just taking a few minutes of deep breathing. It can really help calm the nervous system. So it's often better to do something imperfectly than doing nothing at all. And like you said, if possible, it's also a good time to ask for help, delegate, and also let go of tasks that are not essential.
Brilliant, thank you. Again, just a reminder, please, if anyone wants to put questions in the chat while you've got the chance, there's like just under 10 minutes left. So, if anyone is in the chat now, if anyone is listening to this session and they're thinking this sounds like them, then where would you suggest they start and what kind of support can help?
Yeah, I think I will start on that one if you want. So if I were to suggest 3 places to begin, so my top tips would be, so first, try to get some natural daylight in the morning. So it's actually one of the simplest and most powerful things we can do for our energy and sleep. So basically, morning light helps set our body clock, so our circadian rhythms. So we are more alert during the day and more likely to sleep well at night. So basically, it helps support the production of melatonin. So melatonin is our sleep hormone later in the evening. So morning daylight, even if it's just 5-10 minutes. My second would be, again, I'm repeating myself, but eating regular meals. So try not to wait until you feel completely drained. So eating regularly helps provide a more consistent source of energy for both our brain and our body. And third, last but not least, let's protect our energy. I often talk about the energy vampires. That all these people or situations that leave us completely drained. And of course, we can't always avoid them. Like, let's say, it could be a family member, could be a bit awkward, but we can often create healthier boundaries around them. So yeah, this would be my 3 top picks. And of course, yeah, if I can add another one quickly, is to try not to handle it all by yourself. So it's important to talk to the GP, because it's always better not to assume that it's all just stress or hormones or just ADHD. So I always think if someone is feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, burnt out, it's having a conversation with a GP is always a helpful first step.
Brilliant, thank you. And Liz?
Yeah, I would echo that, what Karen's just said, that the internal versus the external. Internally, this is not yours to bear alone, and looking for that support. And Karen's quite rightly said the role of the GP in your health, from a work perspective, and I've suggested some of those earlier, those people around you that can potentially, if you feel that there is the trust there, to go to them and know that you can ask for help, and to go easy on yourself. And if people are curious and inquisitive about how they managed their energy, and if they've had experiences or feel that this does sound like them, there's a model framework called the 5 C's of burnout, which I think you can put a filter on towards work, and those are conditions, so the condition of the environment you work in, the culture, so mentioned about the trust there, have you got the support there that you can go to, conviction is the third one, which is about the motivation that you have, and then finally choices and capacity. So people can look up that framework, and that might be really useful for them to start thinking about, okay, if I am in a place where I feel that I want and have the agency, what can I do myself, but also know and be really compassionate that there are other people out there that do want to help you, be it in the workplace or anywhere else.
Lovely. Thank you both so much. I think we've come to the end of our planned questions. I can't see any more going into the chat. So if no one has anything they'd like to add, then we can think about rounding off the session there. But I'd like to say a huge thank you to both of you for giving us your wisdom today. It's been much appreciated. I believe if people want to read more, there's an ebook that you both have written, which is Unique Minds, Unique Menopause. You can see that on the Get Doper Unmasked website. There's a link to it on there, so please go and check that out. And you can see Karine and Liz's details on the slide. So if you have anything to follow up with them after the session, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to take questions. I'll speak from both of you. Maybe you wouldn't. But yeah, thank you so much. You might be cursing me now. Yeah, thanks so much.
Not at all, Emmy. More than happy to. And you know, there's a resource that I've sort of got in my back pocket. So if anybody is interested in that sort of aligns with some of what I'm saying, then you know, feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to share that through the appropriate channels. But really appreciate getting the opportunity to hang out with everybody and answer people's questions.
Lovely. Thank you both so much, and everyone in the chat. Have a lovely evening. And Anna, I hope you make some of the recipes. Let us know if you make them. Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers. Have a good evening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a lovely evening.